So I'm actually quite surprised by like how many people showed up. I expected there to be like two or three, and for the talk to be more of like a discussion format. So I'll be happy if you guys join in. My name is Joseph. I maintain the local hackerspace in the basement. In case you haven't been there yet, go to Bordel. When you see the red neon sign saying Bordel, just don't be shy, enter. But yeah, today I'm going to talk about identity in general, about identity in the context of digital totality, and how I think the identity space and the identification space is going to evolve, especially in the context of Web3. So beyond Paronipolis, I'm involved in the Ethereum community. I've been working on like a few projects. One of them was touching identity about like 2 or 3 years ago. In the end, like we can also discuss like implementation details if anyone is interested. So first of all, I'm going to talk about like what is an identity? How did we get to where we are now through like the evolution of authentication? Then I want to talk about the Web3 paradigm and like how does that fit in? And in the end, I want to mention like few, in my opinion, interesting groups that are kind of researching the identity topic for 20 years now, and then about some like practical use cases that can be already tried out. So, what is identity? The Cambridge Dictionary and like a bunch of other random Google searches will show you this. Identity is who a person is or the qualities of a person or group that make them different from others. So this means it's just the set of things that is like different from anyone else, and that's how you identify. And now, what do you identify? We can talk about like personal identity. We can talk about an identity of an organization, or like a nation-wide identity, or identity with a tribe, with ethnicity, and about like identities of a whole bunch of other things. I'm sure at one point we'll talk about different identities and the distinguishing factors of like different popular AI setups. So that would be kind of the like human sciences type of definition. The other one, the more exact one, you can say that identity is basically a mathematical operator, the equal. But we are not going to talk about that. So during this talk, I want to focus mostly on personal identity, but I think it's still worthwhile to kind of like reason about the other connections, because especially like throughout the evolution, those things are interconnected. So what do you think was the first way to identify one another within like a like a group of people, humans, that's known today? What do you think is the oldest thing that people use to authenticate themselves? What? A name as like a verbal operator. So sure, that's like a label of a person, and then you would just like distribute that knowledge among the group. Any other thoughts? All right. Yeah. Now we are getting into like the identity of like a different tribe system, but the kind of first associated item, talking about like a physical item that's known is jewelry or like visual symbols. Roughly 100,000 years before Christ, people used to like wear different jewelries to associate themselves with a tribe. Basically, these insignias are used today, or even like in this age, but prevalently like those were just used throughout the history. You could say, like the local shaman or the local king is the guy with the crown, right? That was his authentication. Whoever had the crown was the king. That's how you tell he's a king. But even in like more, like primitive social groups. They were just like different types of bones, like different types of rings that people were wearing to identify themselves with like their family or their tribe. Roughly 2,000 years before Christ, at least given the archaeological research, as far as we can tell, tattoos were this old. And like one of the ways like people started like identifying themselves personally with something you cannot remove from them, going beyond like the physical objects, were tattoos. So this is a statue of a man found somewhere in China, apparently originating like thousands of years ago. This is a member of Yakuza who was arrested like 2 years ago somewhere in Malaysia, I believe. But this was kind of, this was like getting chipped, right? Like you just use your body to put like all of the symbols so people can tell like this is the guy, like you don't need to remember his face, just like see if he has a tattoo. But obviously like this is still kind of forgeable. Like if you you could, the same way you could just like take the insignia, the jewelry from someone before, you could just like make the same tattoo and like trying to infringe someone else. With ancient Rome and Greek, we are getting to like more formalized even like human societies in general, but also to more formalized identity documents. So this is a so-called diploma, a military diploma, yearly 200 years before Christ, where this document is basically a CV of a soldier, which just enumerates like all of the battles that that person went to, basically granting him the citizenship of Rome, which then gave him like special privileges, like being considered a citizen, being exempt from taxes for the military service, and being able to like participate on the higher society. Basically, like you can forge a document as well. Then in 1414, we are getting to like a first type of like a passporty document where a king could basically give someone a paper which authorizes that person to do X. That just says, well, me as a king, there is my stamp, my sigil. I'm calling this person whatever, citizen. It gives him certain right. Then again, continuously in Britain, in 1829, Robert Peel started. Like obviously he wasn't the person issuing those numbers, but he started using personal identification numbers, or suggested those to be used for all citizens of the kingdom. Then later on, we are going like to a bit more detail of what an identity can consist of. With negative photography in 1840, obviously a whole new branch of identification was there to be used. So then with the next discovery of fingerprints and the possibility of like using those to identify a person, 30 years later, we obviously get like a yet new aspect of what objectively you can, of the data set that you can kind of gather to identify someone. Then throughout the 20th century, we basically got where we are now. Like we went through physical passports that enabled traveling between countries that had some sort of an agreement about like accepting those. We got through like regular passports. Boom! Now everyone has an identity card, obviously connected with your personal ID, issued by the local government. In 1980s, there are yet two new like innovative things being introduced. One is the first digital IDs, which include a sign-in key where you can basically identify yourself digitally, and The interesting part is that we are kind of like getting back to, well, yet now having an object for identification. But obviously with biometrical data, with photography, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Also in the 80s, the DNA profiling started to be used to identify an individual. Now we get like more up to date. The buzzwords that you can often hear in connection to identity kind of evolved in a way where in 1999 EU started accepting electronic signatures for signing official documents. In 2001, through the Patriot Act, a thing that we all love and adore, AML and KYC started being a thing for basically anybody. In 2007, the PSD, Payment Service Directives in the EU, also like in connection to AML and KYC, kind of shaped the way the state is trying to like utilize the fact that they have the data and can like identify you online. From PSD, there's the EIDAS initiative, which tries to kind of bridge the differences between how like digital identities are being used across the EU. 2015, current like very up-to-date buzzword PSD2, which is again like an advancement that should enable also like reusing your identity between like service providers in the banking sector. And then obviously GDPR, which kind of goes against like all of these, because this is the point where people started realizing, yeah, well, maybe if we create these like huge databases, being able to identify everybody, well, that's not always good. And maybe we actually want to kind of keep some parts of the information for ourselves. So this all relates to kind of governmental systems and money transfers. But there is also like throughout the 21st century, there's also like a whole another branch of how authentication in connection to like your personal identity is being handled, which is through popular services such as Google login, Facebook login, or like any other service provider that's out there. Here locally, there would be Moje ID, but I'm certain there are also like different services handling the same thing in other countries. So yeah, these solutions are kind of cool, right? Those are voluntary. Like you don't have to use those services. You can sign up. Get an excellent like UX benefit, because like you don't have to like every app like all of a sudden doesn't have to build their own authentication system. It can just get some data from Google, which is good for the business. Yeah, so obviously there is a way out of this, but what this also enabled, because like these types of login services became quite popular. I'm pretty sure pretty much like everybody in the room has ever used those. If not, then talk to me later. I'm just interested in like how you spend your time. This also made Sybil attacks like much easier, because like all of a sudden there is like an alternative way to how like states tend to identify the people, to just like create your online identity, picking like whatever service, and it doesn't have to be just Google or Facebook, right? Like you can just go to a random forum, start new nickname, and you can spin out like hundreds of these. You can have like a unique identity for any service that you're using. You can even have like multiple Google logins, etc. So it was all good until like recently, especially the big providers started like utilizing phone numbers as a way to like limit the artificially created profiles that can be used as a cover for another person. So it became a bit harder. Now you have to, get a phone number. It's like somewhere it's easier, somewhere it's not. So it's already constraining you. And now, like now there is actually like a feasible way to just live your daily life, except for the cases where you actually like need to sign something to the government and you have to like go back to whatever they're offering you. But hey, this is a feasible alternative. Like actually, like any government could just like tap into that, and instead of like building their own layer, they could just like use some of the service providers, right? But we are again getting to like a corporate surveillance. We are getting into like these companies utilizing all of the data they have and having like the power over your identity because they hold your data. And now like LinkedIn is back to like GDPR, that's like a governmental attempt to balance the fact that they don't actually have as many data as these companies. So especially in the Web 2 context with Google Auth and like Facebook logins, it's kind of obvious that given like how many people use these services, the user experience of like being able to tap into someone else's security, tap into someone else's database of users, and not having to start everything from scratch again has bigger value to people in privacy. For most, that's kind of true. Luckily, like this is changing these days, at least in Central Europe. Like there are events such as this one, but even the companies in the identity space that make surveys and try to understand like what the users actually care about, figured out that thanks to like Cambridge Analytica and whatever like other types of leaks, people are actually like more aware of the strings attached and are starting to value their privacy yet again. Now, I guess it's kind of obvious where this goes to, because with your governmental identity, you can just have one, most likely. I guess there are ways to get your second identity somewhere else. Those are definitely non-trivial. If you know those, I would be also interested in like talking about it later. But yeah, like for the people in the room, the benefit of not being able to, or for someone else not being able to identify you easily so you can keep your privacy is a valuable thing. And now we get to dissociative identity, which most of you probably already have in some way. I don't want to make fun of like mental illnesses, but when you search for like DIDs, decentralized identifiers, decentralized identity standards, it also matches with another DID, the dissociative identity disorder, which is basically multiple personality disorder, and I mean, obviously it's considered an illness, an unwanted state of mind. But for us, being interested in keeping your digital privacy, this is actually something we want. We want a disorder, right? We want our image or image of our identity to have this type of a disorder where you can basically maintain different faces for like different circumstances. Also, being accompanied by a memory gap. Like you don't want these two worlds to be linked for whatever reasons. And this is the point where I get to Web3 and like the technical implementations of allowing dissociative identities in the digital space. Well, obviously, again, with like Web 2, you could spin out like a bunch of your own identities. It's getting harder these days, but it's still the same type of infrastructure. It's like the same type of process where you have a user. The user uses someone else's like server database to store their user profiles, and then like through that he interacts with those services. And like these, there could be like little services you can connect directly to Facebook, just leaving the information with them, or even using those authentication services as proxies, basically telling Facebook to give a subset of your data to another service provider. And this is the world that we live in now, where you basically just have to log in information. That's all you own. Like, you don't have the data. You have to ask them. Like, they should give it to you, but you never know. In the Web3 context, the difference that the decentralized identity standards are based on is the fact that in that realm, you should be the person holding all of your personal data, and you should only allow services to tap into that without like storing the data, because they don't need it. Unless they use it for some sort of computation, like even then, you could do it like homomorphically. But the service providers, like, they don't really need the data, right? Like, if you know, like, everybody's ordering stuff online. Like, on every single website, on every single e-shop, you're filling out the same information all over and over, like the address, your credit card numbers. If you don't do it, I mean, good for you. You can even like come up with multiple, but the fact is, like, it's just easier to like use the one address where you are certain your packages are going to arrive. Now, does like every single e-shop need that information? Do they need to keep it after you're finished with the purchase? Likely not. But even the architecture of those services isn't ready for just like asking for that information at the time they actually need it. And that's what's supposed to change with Web3, where the user keeps his user profile, and he just allows services or credential validators, which can be like other horrible word KYC providers or authentication services, without like ever giving the data away. And that's already possible. That's already possible like with the technologies that we have, but it's just a matter of getting there. So the Web3 context, the paradigm is a pushback on that old architecture or the current architecture. As it happens like every now and then, the point here is to keep those services as peer-to-peer as possible. Meaning that whatever information you can like leave at one point, and you don't have to like distribute it anywhere, just like keep it there. Just as like with your with login info, your online presence profile, whatever, all of the, you know, like if you want to interact with the service should ask for like a concrete set of data, and it's already happening with like Google Out and stuff. So the main point is that you should keep your own data. You shouldn't like leave it with the custodial services the same way like you don't do it with crypto. And what the new paradigm also allows are like different types of recoveries, because like obviously if you own your data, you also have the responsibility. It's the same thing with your private keys, since this is also about like maintaining your private keys and like all of the info that you want to share at some point. You're responsible for not getting it lost, and that's why like new solutions for that is like social recovery, where you like pick a bunch of friends who can then authenticate you back into the system are being used. One like subpoint, this leads to like creating essential like reputation systems in different contexts. This is like what a lot of companies are trying to achieve these days. What's also a new thing is just provable usage, because like in Web3 context, obviously, like everybody has a crypto wallet. Everybody has their set of private keys. They know how to handle it, or they use a custodial service. But now with a bunch of these like keys being used on chain, you actually can use or can bootstrap like reputation using on-chain data. You can just say, well, for instance, I only want this app to be initially used by the people that use like Bitcoin before the block X, and you could just like get all of the addresses and basically create an authentication on that, or just use all like a Merkle proof in a contract to identify to do it like seamlessly. So yeah, what's the hard part? Like, given that like everybody here probably uses crypto, has some experience with that, you know what the ins and outs are. You know what you should avoid. You know how to protect your private keys. But what do you do when you just want to like use another private key and start your own identity from scratch? Because like in the online world, it's easier. Obviously, it's like not so easy when you want to actually do something with the government, but that's where like the additional KYC providers get to play, because the fact that in the initial point, if there are these like two domains, like one is the governmental identification, the other one is the corporate one. You could probably like, it could look like the same. But in the beginning, the person that KYCs you is obviously the government, the official service. In the other case, it's like a corporation, and most of the identification is just based on the fact that you have an email, that you have the ability to get an email. I mean, these images are essentially the same, right? There is like not a huge difference. You still could have like intermediary services. The big difference is that now when you can just like, you don't have to ask for like a personal number, right? Like you can just pick any of the private keys out there. You just pick a random number, boom, you have a key that can sign stuff about like your identity. And you can start your own thing. You can start like interacting with the services, and then it's like up to those services what types of authentication they require. So if all they need is just like knowing that address, the private key was used before a certain block hash, that's easy. If they want you to be like KYC'd by another provider, the way decentralized identities, according to the DID standard handles this, is that you spin out your own like self-sovereign thing, which is your private key or like set of keys. Then you go to a KYC provider, you do the KYC ritual with them, whatever that means in different contexts, and they basically issue a statement which says, well, this set of private keys or like this particular key went through our process, and with our key, we approve that it actually happened. And it's again, depending on the service provider, it depends on them if they decide to accept this type of authentication. This is obviously a lot of work, and for your second identity, for your alter ego to be actually useful, you have to decide like which types of services do you use with like your own like new bootstrap self-sovereign identity, and which you associate with the one that, for instance, like went through the KYC. The one point which I forgot to mention is that none of these like interactions, and this is where the peer-to-peer part comes in, needs to be public, right? Like all of these claims, all of the authentication that happens between the service provider and you, and between like these parties, like those can remain offline. Like you can decide never to publish them unless you want to use them for authenticating with someone else. This doesn't need like any anything being public, and you can just decide like individually like what the rules should be. So the hard problem is like keeping this consistent, because it's like super easy. I'm sure it also happened to you, just like you want to keep one of your addresses private, but boom, then you like accidentally or not accidentally just like need the money to transfer it somewhere else, and boom, you reveal like the entire track of your like Bitcoin transactions or like whatever crypto are you using. So that's a hard problem. I guess there is no solution for that. So if you are actually aware of these types of solutions, that services that kind of take care of certain aspects of like keeping your identity separate, please share those. I'm not sure how much time we have. Cool. what I want to encourage you is to like start your alter egos now. If you have a way to get yourself KYC'd in like bunch of different names, you should do it as soon as possible, because as you could see throughout the evolution of authentication and identities, in the beginning it was quite easy to just like have two separate identities, right? You could just have different like jewelries, you could have like different types of documents, but it was getting increasingly harder to do that. With those corporate authentication services and the fact that those are being so popular that you can even like use them to handle money, you can still achieve it to some extent, but it will, like tomorrow it will get again a bit harder than today. And if you kind of maintain consistent identities that are, for instance, like utilizable in the DID standard, to which we'll get a bit later, then even that set of data, that identity has value. So if you like create artificial identities that which basically can be any set of aspects. It can be like having multiple Gmail accounts, maintaining like multiple numbers, kind of creating consistent track of like appearing to be somewhere else, not being you. That's valuable. I'm quite certain that you could even like buy identities now, but I'm certain that in the future you will actually have like a whole market for trading your set of keys that people used in like reputation systems and use for certain services, and you'll be able to like get someone else's name for a while and then decide to sell it as well, depending if it has any value to anybody. So a lot of the identity stuff, just to wrap up, is connected to standardization, because like obviously like we cannot use an authentication service if we are like the only person using that, then we are back to where we were. And especially in the context of decentralized identifiers, there is a big group of people working on specifying and implementing the standard. There's like a lot of stuff to read on that note. I definitely wouldn't go through that. There are even like implementations that are completely on chain. For instance, on Ethereum, the ERC 722, 725, 735 is basically a code implementation of what I was just talking about. Like the standardization already happened to some extent, and now depending on like the service providers having the willingness to start utilizing these services, and that's just a matter of adoption, right? The trends that are kind of obvious are utilization of zero-knowledge proofs and like whatever is on-chain when I go to like the blockchain-specific part. And even more interesting is just authentication based on ownership. And we just like recently had a quick chat about this. This is kind of like a digital reintroduction of authenticating with a physical object, like jewelry. Like now again, you can own an NFT, like a non-fungible token, which can be used for you to be authenticated with a service. But you can also decide to just like sell this NFT to someone else, and now whoever holds that token is the king. So as a last part, a shameless plug of some of the things connected to displays in particular. If you're interested in the very like technical specifics of DIDs, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to this group, or Rebooting the Web of Trust. Parallelnipolis was lucky enough to host the last workshop that happened, I don't know when, sometime last year. Two other things that I wanted to mention. Citizen K is one of the art pieces by Stoven. There's even like a documentary which basically 10 years ago deals with the topics that now are getting implemented. The fact that you can create like a merge identity and just kind of swap it as you go. So I definitely encourage you to look at that. And another thing which I found out about during Hackers Congress in like 2017, I don't know, is a documentary by Dylan Reibling, which is called Looking for Mike. And that part was kind of very revealing for me. It's like a 30-minute documentary. I think it's available online. That one is about his friend who passed away, and after that happened, Dylan actually found out that the person wasn't the person who he said he was. So that guy was using a fake identity for several years and created like a whole new life story. And for me, the documentary was especially interesting because it just like shows you how you really cannot trust people, because like, you know, even if you knew them for, you know, 6 years. That was it. Thank you for coming to the talk. If you want to chat about that later, I'll be happy. I wasn't sure like how deep can we go, but we can even talk about the ERC implementations. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, thank you, Josef. So we have about 8 or 9 minutes for questions. I guess we can take some from the room. I saw one hand. Are you okay? All right.
I was going to oppose your first point that isn't smell the first way to identify other individuals even before our vision was good enough to do it, even outside humans, but that's another question. My question is, how do you think we can prevent identity theft in a world where the identity that you use is no longer connected to your physical being? Thanks.
Well, I mean, there's like always a trade-off, right? If we try to completely avoid like identity thefts, we'll probably go in a way of like trying to strengthen the connection between your digital identity and your like physical self, right? Like having, I don't know, like DNA records as claims connected to your identity, and again having like a maintainer, having like a surveiller who knows the truth. So I'm not really sure like this should be like generally prevented, because that will also mean that the chance for getting your second identity is much lower. For me, the core of the question is like, you know, are you cautious, and do you care about your privacy to the extent that you're willing to like handle your private keys yourself? Because it ultimately goes down to whoever has the signing right to that information, because that's where we are heading, in my opinion. So if you want to prevent like privacy theft in that realm, just store your private key safely. But that's connected, right?
I was actually concerned about the situation because like I am one of those stupid human beings that will definitely not be able to remember all of my information that I use to access various services. So I have the choice of either writing down everything on a paper, which is extremely inefficient, or exposing myself to the danger that somebody will steal my information. So I am sure that this way, like if we will inevitably expose ourselves to the danger of somebody stealing our whole online persona from us, because we do not have any way of ensuring that it will be always connected to us.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess that depends on, again, on the way to like access that information that you use for logins. I mean, like now you use logins. In my opinion, you're going to, in several years, you're just going to use private keys, even for logins, because like you don't really need logins. So I mean, in that way, for me, it goes down to how you protect your private keys, because like I don't think the authentication as you know it now with like email and password will stay here for long. Yeah, but I think essentially think this is the way. I think like the way is to you know, get rid of like the two-way authentication system, just like leave it on a secure key that's that anyone can get, you know. You don't, because like that login information is still in the database of the authentication service of the service provider. But I think we are getting away from that to like a, you know, like a leaner set of keys that you can then use instead of that type of login. Yeah, the thing is, it can and it doesn't have to. You can still keep a lot of privacy, but you can also distribute the knowledge about like how these keys are connected. It just depends on you, like what's the part that you are comfortable with revealing. And with having like even multiple of those identities, you can decide like what needs to be connected, what needs to be you, and what's the set of data that can be your alter ego.
Okay, can we try one more question? Yeah? Okay.
So if in the context of Web3, you only need to sign to provide a signature that you are having a key, that you are in possession of a key, what is this ERC tokens, no, contracts?
Yeah.
Is it doing this? Is like just providing a signature, or it has some fancy special features?
So those contracts are basically just the standard interface that the apps can then use to utilize that as for like authentication or for passing over some of the data. So it basically, the contract is a definition of like how do you, it's just a formatting standard of like how you store the information about the keys, because you start with like one key, right? But you can by using that key for signing transactions toward, if that's in the case of a contract, for signing transactions towards a contract, you can like add multiple other keys that you can, you know, you don't even have to reveal those. You can just like publish hashes of those keys, just so you can then, if someone asks you, you know, you want to authenticate and you send them like a bucket with data saying, hey, this is that authentication service telling it's me. It's like I possess like this set of parameters, so you can authenticate me because that's what the service requires. How do they know? How do they know like it actually originates from like one point, or it's associated with whatever you're like sending them right now, like whichever key you're using. So there is this like list of like public keys that I mean, the same way you publish your PGP fingerprint to an attester, right? You can just like have multiple of those and say, well, that's me. I'm signing it with this key. Have a look there, like to your blockchain, for instance, to verify that it's actually me. And this can happen off-chain, right? This just happens like peer-to-peer. And they can have a look into like a central database in this case to verify what the association that you're telling them it exists actually exists.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think that might be it for Q&A, right? Okay, we have one on the stream. Okay, okay, I'm going to read this, all right? Okay, is there a way to use an alter ego in a KYC request? I assume as some sort of authentication with KYC.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would like to know where it's possible and the easiest. I think, like for instance, as I mentioned, the Citizen K document. That's where you kind of can see that in some ways it's possible, and you know, like still a lot of the stuff that we deal with on a daily basis is just based on like different nations, different states having like certain contracts and certain types of acceptances between themselves. So, for instance, and like these days, for effectivity reasons, the things like EIDAS are basically trying to like reutilize your KYC for like different other purposes. So once you find like your hack into the system, then you could probably achieve like having like a good second track with strong KYC. Like, it's not the best example, but I believe like in the US, if you you can just be KYC'd like by one bank in order to get an account with another one. So you can either go through like the KYC that the bank provides, or you can tell them, hey, there is already another subject that already did that, and through that appeal, you will basically be considered fine for them. So whenever you find like the weakest part of the chain, that's where you can enter. And this doesn't have to be like, this doesn't have to be in one state, right? Again, you can probably go to, I don't know where, and get get a passport, and use that to somehow like bootstrap that alter ego. So I don't know like what the one way would be. I wouldn't definitely say it, even if I knew.
Okay. I think that's it then for Q&A. Okay, thank you very much, Joseph.